Two Steel Scorpions bikers pulled into a quiet gas station looking for an easy target. They found a Vietnam War hero instead. What happened next would unravel a $100 million trafficking operation, expose a web of corruption, and teach the most feared motorcycle gang in the state a painful lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous person at a gas station is the quiet veteran filling up his '67 Mustang. They thought they were intimidating an old man. Instead, they picked a fight with one of the most decorated Special Forces intelligence officers in Vietnam War history. This is the story of how a couple of bikers provoked the last war hero at a gas station, and how their moment of arrogance led to the biggest organized crime takedown the state had ever seen. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the sunset. Valley Gas Station as James Connor carefully filled the tank of his meticulously maintained 1967 Ford Mustang. The Purple Heart pin on his collar caught the late afternoon light, a quiet reminder of sacrifices made long ago. At 72, James moved with the measured precision of a man who had never forgotten his military training, even after all these years. Catherine Morgan, known to everyone as Kate, emerged from the station shop with a fresh pot of coffee. She'd owned the place for 5 years now, turning it from a rundown pit stop into a community hub where truckers and locals alike found friendly faces and hot coffee. "Your usual James?" Kate asked, already reaching for his cup. "You know me." "Too well," James replied, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. The peaceful scene shattered as 3 motorcycles thundered into the station, their engines drowning out an elderly couple's car horn as they cut across its path. The bikes came to a stop, arranged in an intimidating line that blocked 2 parking spaces. Their riders, clad in black leather jackets bearing the emblem of a coiled scorpion, dismounted with practiced arrogance. Tyler Rhodes, known on the streets as Blade, removed his helmet to reveal elaborate tattoos crawling up his neck. His companions, Drake Matthews and Michael the Russian Russo, flanked him like well-trained attack dogs. "Well, well," Tyler announced, his voice carrying across. "The lot. Look what we've found, boys, a real slice of American pie." James continued filling his tank, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Kate tensed slightly, but maintained her professional demeanor. "Welcome to Sunset Valley," she said evenly. "What can I help you with?" Tyler's laugh held no warmth. "Oh, how cute. Full service and everything, like stepping back in time." Drake and Russo spread out, their boots crunching on the gravel as they surveyed the station with predatory interest. James replaced the fuel nozzle with a quiet click, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Hey, Grandpa," Tyler called out, sauntering closer to James. "Sweet ride? Bet that was new when you were young." "'67. Mustang," James replied calmly. "Still runs beautifully. Might look better in my garage," Tyler suggested, running a finger along the car's polished hood. James turned slowly, facing Tyler directly for the first time. Something in his eyes made the younger man pause, though he quickly covered it with a smirk. "Son," James said quietly, "I've seen your type before. You think that leather and those patches make you dangerous? But you're just playing at being bad men." Tyler's smirk twisted into a snarl. "You better watch your mouth, old-timer." "I fought alongside real bad men in Vietnam," James continued, his voice steady. "Men who'd make you wet yourself just by looking at you. Last warning, take your business elsewhere." Drake pulled out a switchblade, flicking it open with practiced flair. "Maybe we should teach Gramps here some respect." What none of them noticed was Kate quietly pressing a button under the counter, or the small camera above the door, its red light blinking steadily. "Put it away," James said, not even glancing at the knife, "before you embarrass yourself." Tyler stepped closer, his breath hot with anger. "You got some nerve, old man. Do you know who we are?" "I know exactly who you are," James replied. That's why I'm giving you a chance to leave. Drake lunged forward, blade glinting in the sunlight. James moved with surprising speed, his hand catching Drake's wrist in a grip honed by years of combat. Training. With a simple twist, the knife clattered to the ground, and Drake found himself gasping in pain. "That's enough," Tyler shouted. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. James released Drake, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist. "Like I said, you're playing at being bad men. Real bad men would know better than to start trouble here." The rumble of an approaching truck caught everyone's attention. Pete Davidson, the station manager, was returning from his supply run. The bikers exchanged glances, their confidence wavering. Tyler backed away, maintaining his sneer despite the fear now visible in his eyes. "This isn't over, old man. Nobody disrespects the Steel Scorpions." "It is over," James said firmly, "unless you want to find out just how much trouble you're really in." The bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life. As they sped away, Kate approached James, her hands still shaking slightly. "You okay?" she asked quietly. James nodded, watching the dust settle on the road. "They'll be back." "Should we call the police?" "Not yet," James replied, his eyes narrowing. "Something about them isn't right. Those patches they're wearing, the way they carry themselves. They're connected to something bigger." "What do you mean?" "In Vietnam, I worked intelligence. You learn to spot patterns, connections. Those weren't just ordinary bikers trying to look tough. They're soldiers in someone else's army." Kate glanced at the security camera, its red light still blinking. "Well, we got it all on video at least." James smiled slightly. "Good, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning." As the sun set over Sunset Valley gas station, none of them could have guessed just how right he was, or how this simple confrontation would spiral into something that would shake their quiet community to its core. Pete Davidson parked his delivery truck and hurried over to James and Kate, his face etched with concern. "I saw those bikes leaving. Steel Scorpions, weren't they? Are you both all right?" "We're fine, Pete," Kate assured him, though her hands still trembled slightly as she poured. "Fresh coffee." James sat at the counter, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tension lingering in the air. "They're not just ordinary troublemakers. Those patches they were wearing, they're too new, too uniform. Someone's bankrolling them." "What do you mean?" Pete asked, sliding onto a stool next to James. "Back in Nam, I tracked supply lines, monitored gang activities. You learn to spot the signs. These guys aren't just some local gang. They're organized, well-funded." Kate leaned across the counter, lowering her voice. "Should we be worried?" "Not yet," James replied, his eyes distant with memory. "But we should be careful. And Pete, you might want to install some extra security cameras, especially around back." Lisa Carter, the young attendant, emerged from the stockroom. "Ms. Morgan, those bikers, they've been here before, haven't they?" Kate nodded slowly. "Last week, just drove through watching the place. I didn't think much of it then." "They're scouting," James said quietly. "Testing responses, looking for weaknesses. It's what I would have done back in the day." "Back in the day?" Lisa asked, curiosity overtaking her fear. James touched the purple heartpin on his collar. "Special Forces, Intelligence Division. We tracked enemy movements, supply lines, criminal networks that were funding operations against us." Pete whistled low. "No wonder you handled them so well. But why here? Why our station?" "Location," James replied, pulling out a small notebook. "You're the last stop for 50 miles on the interstate. Perfect spot for distribution." The word hung heavy in the air. "Distribution of what?" Kate asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Whatever they're moving, drugs probably, maybe weapons. The Steel Scorpions are new money. Someone's using them as muscle, as a front." The bell above the door chimed as a state trooper entered. Officer Martinez was a regular, stopping by every evening for coffee and conversation. "Evening, folks," he said, then paused, noting the tension. "Everything all right?" Kate started to speak, but James caught her eye, giving a subtle shake of his head. "Just fine, officer," she said instead. "The usual." As Martinez waited for his coffee, James observed him carefully. The officer's eyes kept darting to the security cameras, and his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. After Martinez left, James turned to Kate. "Don't trust him. Did you see how he reacted when he spotted the cameras? He's nervous." "Jack? But he's been coming here for years," Kate protested. "Exactly. He's watching the place for them. Probably has been for a while." Lisa's eyes widened. "You think he's involved? Small town like this, they'd need someone in law enforcement. Makes sense they'd cultivate relationships years in advance." Pete ran a hand through his hair. "So what do we do?" "For now, nothing," James said, standing up. "Act normal. But Kate, make copies of that security footage. Keep one set here. Give another to me. And whatever you do, don't let anyone know you have it." As James walked to his Mustang, Kate followed him out. "James, wait! Why are you helping us? You could just walk away." He paused, looking back at the station. "Because 30 years ago, in a village in Vietnam, I walked away, saw something wrong, and didn't stop it. Never again." The rumble of motorcycles echoed in the distance. "They're watching," James said quietly. "Probably have been all day. Go inside, Kate, lock up early tonight, and remember, trust no one outside this station." As James drove away, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that her quiet life running a gas station was about to become something much more dangerous. Inside, Pete was already on the phone, ordering additional security equipment, while Lisa nervously watched the road through the window. None of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street, or the woman inside taking photographs of everyone who entered and left the station. FBI agent Maria Ramirez had been tracking the steel Scorpions for months, and now, finally, she had something interesting to report. A Vietnam vet with intelligence experience. This could be the break she'd been waiting for. As night fell over, Sunset Valley gas station, the pieces of a much larger puzzle, were slowly starting to come together. The bikers' failed attempt at intimidation had unknowingly set in motion events that would expose decades of corruption and crime. But for now, in the gathering darkness, there was only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, the soft clicking of security cameras, and the growing certainty that tomorrow would bring trouble back to their door. The next morning dawned cold and grey over Sunset Valley. James Connor arrived at the gas station earlier than usual, parking his Mustang where he could watch both the highway and the station entrance. Kate was already inside, reviewing the security footage from yesterday with Pete. "Look at this," Kate said, pointing to the screen. "The way they positioned their bikes, it wasn't random." James leaned in, studying the footage. They were blocking the security camera's view of the highway. Professional move. These guys have military training. "Military?" Pete asked, surprised. "I thought they were just thugs." "Thugs don't move like that," James replied, freezing the frame. "See how Drake handles that knife? That's special ops technique. Someone's recruiting ex-military for their operation." The bell above the door chimed. Lisa hurried in, her face pale. They're back, 3 bikes parked across the street. James moved to the window. Sure enough, Tyler, Drake, and Russo sat on their motorcycles, watching the station. This time they weren't alone. A black pickup truck was parked nearby, 2 more steel Scorpions inside. "They're getting bolder," James muttered. "Kate, where's that second copy of yesterday's footage?" "In my office safe." "Good. Keep it there." James turned to Pete. "Those new cameras installed?" Pete nodded. "Put them in last night. Full coverage of the back lot now." The rumble of motorcycles grew louder as the bikers crossed the street, pulling into the station. Tyler dismounted first, his swagger more pronounced than yesterday. "Miss us?" he called out, striding toward the door. James positioned himself near the counter, seemingly casual but ready. Kate stood her ground behind the register, while Pete moved closer to the phone. Tyler pushed through the door, followed by Drake and Russo. The bell's cheerful chime felt oddly out of place. "Well, if it isn't our favorite war hero," Tyler sneered. "Been thinking about our conversation yesterday." "Not much to think about," James replied calmly. "Unless you're here as customers." Drake stepped forward, but his wrist was still visibly swollen from yesterday's encounter. "You got lucky, old man. That won't happen twice." "Luck had nothing to do with it," James said, his voice level. "Just like it's not luck that your friends in the pickup are carrying weapons under their jackets." Tyler's smirk faltered slightly. "You've been watching us. Just like you've been watching this place for weeks, right? Marking delivery schedules, shift changes, police patrols." "Pretty smart for a gas station hero." Russo spoke up, his Russian accent thick with mockery. "Smart enough to know you're not really here about yesterday. This station's important to your operation, isn't it? Strategic location, regular traffic, perfect cover for moving product." Tyler's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Let's see. You've got Officer Martinez on payroll watching the place. Probably have similar arrangements. At other stations along the interstate, it's a good system, until someone notices." "You threatening us, old man?" Drake growled. James smiled slightly. "Just making conversation. But since you're here, let me share something I learned in Vietnam. The thing about corruption is, it leaves traces, money trails, phone records, security footage. Amazing what a careful observer might notice." The threat in his words was clear. Tyler's hand twitched toward his jacket, but James's steady gaze stopped him. "We're not done here," Tyler said, backing toward the door. "Actually, we are," James replied. "And Tyler, tell your boss that using ex-military as muscle might seem smart, but it has a downside. We tend to recognize our own." The bikers retreated, their bravado diminished. As they roared away, Kate let out a shaky breath. "You knew they had guns," she said. "How?" "The way they moved. Military habit. You adjust your stance when you're carrying. More importantly, they just confirmed everything I suspected." "By running away?" Pete asked. "By reacting to what I said about Martinez, about their operation. They're not just criminals. They're soldiers in someone else's war, and now we know their weakness." Lisa, who had been quietly watching from near the stockroom, spoke up. "What weakness?" "Pride," James said. "They're ex-military, used to being the toughest guys around, being embarrassed by an old man. That'll make them sloppy, make them want to prove something." The black SUV across the street started its engine. Agent Ramirez had heard everything through the directional microphone, and James's analysis matched her own investigation perfectly. But something bothered her. The way he had handled the situation, drawn out their reactions. It was almost like he knew she was listening. Inside the station, James watched the SUV pull away. "We had an audience," he said quietly. "Federal. Probably FBI. They're building a case." "How can you tell?" Kate asked. "Because that's exactly what I would have done." He turned to face them. "Things are going to get more complicated. Those bikers will be back, and next time they won't be alone. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" Pete asked nervously. "For when they realize that this quiet little gas station is about to become their biggest nightmare." The security cameras continued their silent vigil as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. In a few hours, the Steel Scorpions would report to their real boss, and the stakes of this small-town standoff would rise dramatically. But for now, there was only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the growing certainty that the next confrontation would be much more dangerous than the last. Across town, in an abandoned warehouse, Tyler faced his real boss, Marcus Bishop, a former army colonel turned crime boss. Bishop sat behind a makeshift desk, his expensive suit out of place in the dusty surroundings. "Let me understand this," Bishop said quietly, his voice carrying the edge that had made soldiers tremble in Afghanistan. "You were outmaneuvered by an old man at a gas station." "He's not just some old man," Tyler protested. He's ex-military special forces. He knows about our operation. Bishop's eyes narrowed. And whose fault is that? You were supposed to establish our presence there quietly. Instead, you let your ego get in the way. We can handle him, Drake insisted. Just let us go back with more men. Shut up. Bishop stood, his imposing frame casting a shadow across the room. You've already compromised one of our key distribution points, and now we have a Special Forces veteran watching our every move. He mentioned Vietnam, Russo added. Intelligence division, Bishop froze. Intelligence, what exactly did he say? Something about tracking supply lines, monitoring operations. He knew about Martinez, about our surveillance. A slow smile spread across Bishop's face. James Connor. Has to be. I've heard stories about him. Man was a legend in intelligence circles. So what do we do? Tyler asked. Change of plans. That gas station is too important to our operation. We need it clear by the end of the week. And Connor, he just became our top priority. Meanwhile, back at the station, James was showing Kate how to spot surveillance vehicles. See that white van? Been parked there 3 hours. Too clean for a work van, tinted windows, no company logos. Kate squinted through the window. More steel. Scorpions. No, different game entirely. They're watching the watchers. What do you mean? That FBI agent in the SUV earlier. She's got backup. They're building a case, gathering evidence. Problem is, they're not the only ones watching. Pete joined them, carrying fresh coffee. You think Bishop knows? About the FBI? James raised an eyebrow. You know about Bishop? Everyone knows Marcus. Bishop, Pete said quietly. Ex-military, runs half the county now. Nothing moves through here without his approval. Bishop, James mused. Marcus Bishop, 75th Ranger Regiment? You know him? Know of him. His unit was involved in some questionable operations in Afghanistan. Men went from decorated officer to disgraced veteran pretty quick. Now I understand the military precision in their operation. The bell chimed as Lisa rushed in from her break. Ms. Morgan? There's some men in suits asking questions at the diner. Across the street, James moved to the window. Federal agents. They're mapping the network, starting with local businesses. Should we talk to them? Kate asked. Not yet. Bishop will have people watching. We need to be smart about this. A police cruiser pulled into the lot. Officer Martinez again. James watched as he stepped out, his movements more hesitant than usual. He's nervous, James observed. Bishop must have told him to increase surveillance. Martinez entered, his hand resting near his weapon. Evening, folks. Just doing routine checks. Coffee, Jack? Kate offered, maintaining their normal routine. Not today. Just making sure everything's secure. James met Martinez's gaze. Very secure, officer. We've upgraded our cameras. Coverage is excellent now. Catches everything. Martinez's face tightened. Good to hear. Stay safe. He left quickly, speaking into his radio as he reached his car. He's reporting to someone, James said. Bishop's tightening his grip. What's our next move? Kate asked. We wait. Let them make the next mistake. Right now, Bishop's operation is like a spider web. Touch one strand, the whole thing vibrates. We need to be patient. The sound of motorcycles echoed in the distance. More steel scorpions? Lisa asked nervously. James shook his head. No, different engine sounds. These are Harleys. Bishop's sending his veteran riders, professional enforcers. 3 motorcycles appeared on the horizon, their riders wearing different patches, a red skull with military insignia. Kate, James said quietly, get Lisa into the back. Pete, remember what I showed you about the cameras? It's time to see what Bishop's really willing to risk. The Harleys pulled into the lot, their engines growling like predators. The riders dismounted with military precision. No wasted movement, no showboating like the steel scorpions. This, James said, adjusting his purple heartpin, is where it gets interesting. The lead rider removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by combat scars. James recognized him immediately. Samuel "Ghost" Wilson, former Delta Force operative, now Bishop's top enforcer. "Time to see how deep this rabbit hole really goes," James muttered as the bell chimed once again. The real players were finally showing their hands, and the quiet gas station was about to become a battlefield in a war that had been brewing for years. But this time, Bishop's men weren't facing some small-town business owner. They were facing a man who had spent his life understanding how criminal empires worked and how to tear them down from the inside. Samuel "Ghost" Wilson strode into the station like he owned it, flanked by two equally imposing men. Their leather jackets bore combat medals turned into gang patches, a mockery of their military service. "James Connor," Ghost said, his voice gravelly from old war wounds. "Been a long time." James didn't move from his position near the counter. "Desert Storm 91. You were running spec ops while I was gathering intel." Good memory for an old man. Good enough to remember why they called you Ghost. 10 confirmed kills in one night. Never left a trace. Ghost's scarred face twisted into something resembling a smile. "Bishop said you were sharp. Guess he was right." "Bishop," James said quietly, "still hiding behind better men, I see. You don't know him like I do. Man's got vision." "Vision," James scoffed. "He's a disgrace to the uniform, using veterans as muscle for his drug operation." Ghost's companions shifted their stance, subtle combat-ready movements that didn't escape James's notice. "Careful, Connor. Respect goes both ways." "Respect?" James stepped forward. "You want to talk about respect? Look at your patches. Those medals. Men died earning those. Now you wear them while running protection for a criminal." Ghost's face darkened. "You don't understand what Bishop's building. This isn't just about money. We're creating something bigger." "I understand perfectly. Bishop finds veterans who feel abandoned by the system, offers them purpose, brotherhood, money. Same. Tactics terrorist cells use to recruit. We take care of our own," Ghost growled, "by turning them into criminals. Those steel scorpions you're using, young veterans fresh from Afghanistan and Iraq. You're corrupting everything they fought for." Kate watched the exchange silently, noting how James was deliberately pushing Ghost's buttons. Pete had moved closer to the silent alarm, while Lisa peered nervously from the stockroom door. "You're fighting the wrong war, Ghost," James continued. "Bishop's using you, just like he uses Martinez, just like he uses everyone. Last warning, Connor. Back off. This station is important to the operation. Don't make us do this the hard way." James smiled slightly. "The hard way? Like in Kuwait, when your unit got pinned down and had to be rescued by a bunch of intel officers?" Ghost moved with explosive speed, but James was ready. He sidestepped the punch and used Ghost's momentum to send him stumbling into a display rack. "Still telegraphing your moves," James said calmly. Ghost's companions reached for weapons, but James's voice stopped them. "I wouldn't. Those FBI agents across the street have been photographing everyone who enters this station. Plus, Kate's new cameras are streaming everything to a secure server." Ghost straightened up, his military training asserting itself over his anger. "This isn't over, Connor. Actually, it is. Tell Bishop I know about the shipments, about the whole operation. One phone call, and everything he's built collapses." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Ask him about Operation Sandstorm, about what really happened to those missing supplies in 91. I wasn't just gathering intel back then, Ghost. I was building files, insurance." Ghost's face went pale. "How do you... Like you said, I'm sharp. Now get out of my station." The three men retreated, their professional demeanor shaken. As their Harleys roared away, Kate turned to James. "You know something about Bishop, don't you? Something big." James nodded. "Bishop's operation isn't just about drugs. It's about weapons, military-grade hardware disappearing from bases, showing up in criminal hands, been happening for years. And you can prove it?" I can prove Bishop was involved in similar operations during Desert Storm. Man's been running this game for decades. That's why the FBI is watching, Pete realized. Partly. But they're missing the bigger picture. Bishop's not just a criminal. He's building an army, using veterans who feel betrayed by the system, turning their skills to his advantage. What do we do now? Lisa asked, emerging from the stockroom. We wait. Ghost will report to Bishop. Things will escalate quickly after that. Why did you provoke him? Kate asked. Bringing up Kuwait? James smiled grimly. Because now Bishop knows I'm not just some old man who got lucky with his steel scorpions. He knows I'm a real threat. And men like Bishop, they don't handle threats well. They get sloppy. You're using his pride against him, Pete said, understanding. Dawning. Just like in Vietnam, sometimes the best way to destroy an enemy is to let him destroy himself. Outside, the FBI surveillance team photographed Ghost's departure. Agent Ramirez spoke quietly into her radio. Target is moving. And sir, Connor just confirmed the weapons angle. Bishop's operation is bigger than we thought. The pieces were falling into place, but the real war was just beginning. Bishop wouldn't take this challenge lying down, and James knew that the next move would be decisive. The quiet gas station had become a battleground in a conflict that had been brewing for 30 years, and James Connor, the last war hero, was ready to finish what had started in the desert all those years ago. Marcus Bishop slammed his fist on the desk, making Ghost flinch despite his years of combat experience. He knows about Sandstorm. You're absolutely certain. His exact words, sir, said he was building files back then. Insurance. Bishop paced the warehouse office, his expensive shoes raising dust with each step. Connor wasn't just intelligence. He was counter-operations, specialized in dismantling criminal networks within the military. What's our move? Tyler asked from his corner of the room. The Steel Scorpion's leader looked small compared to Ghost's battle-hardened presence. We shut him down. Tonight. Bishop turned to Ghost. Take your best men. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Sir, Ghost hesitated. Connor's not alone. FBI surveillance is heavy, and he's got cameras everywhere. Then get rid of the cameras first. Cut the power. Create confusion. Bishop's voice carried the command authority of his military days. I want that station dark and Connor gone before midnight. Meanwhile, at the gas station, James was teaching Kate and Pete how to spot surveillance patterns. See how that blue sedan keeps circling. Classic counter-surveillance. They're watching the FBI watching us. How many teams are out there? Kate asked, amazed at the complex dance playing out on their quiet street. At least 3. FBI, Bishop's men, and... James paused, studying a distant vehicle. Someone new. Military plates, unmarked car. Military police, Pete suggested. No, something else. Bishop's operation must have attracted attention from higher up. Lisa rushed in from taking out trash. Mr. Connor! I just saw Tyler and those Steel Scorpions meeting with some scary-looking guys behind the diner. Combining forces, James muttered. Bishop's getting desperate. Why desperate? Kate asked. Because I mentioned Sandstorm. It's not just about current operations, it's about what happened 30 years ago. Bishop's entire empire is built on secrets from Desert Storm. The phone rang, making everyone jump. Kate answered, her face growing pale. It's for you, James. He says he's an old friend from Kuwait. James took the phone. Connor. James. Bishop's smooth voice carried decades of authority. We should talk. Nothing to talk about, Marcus. You're still fighting a war that ended 30 years ago. I'm building something important, giving purpose to men the system abandoned. You're exploiting them, using their skills for your criminal empire. Bishop's laugh was cold. Criminal empire. I'm creating order, structure, something these men understand. By running drugs, stealing weapons? That's not order, Marcus. That's chaos in a uniform. Last chance, James, walk away. Those files you mentioned, they're ancient history. No, James said firmly. They're insurance, and you know exactly what they contain. Then you leave me no choice. Bishop's voice hardened. Remember Basra? Sometimes darkness is necessary for victory. The line went dead. James turned to the others. Pete, check the backup generators. Kate, get Lisa somewhere safe. They're coming tonight. What did he mean about Basra? Kate asked. It's a warning. In Basra, they cut power to entire sectors before major operations. James moved to the window. They'll try to black us out, create confusion. Should we call the police? Pete asked, reaching for the phone. They're compromised. Martinez isn't the only one on Bishop's payroll. James checked his watch. We have about 2 hours until sunset. That's when they'll move. What's the play? Kate's voice was steady despite her fear. We let them come, but this time we're ready. James pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. And we're not alone. The voice that answered was familiar. Connor? Been a long time. Thompson. Remember that favor you owe me from Riyadh? Time to collect. Across town, CIA agent David Thompson put down his phone and turned to Agent Ramirez. Connor's in. Operations a go. Bishop's empire was about to face something it had never encountered, a coordinated response from multiple agencies, led by a man who had spent his life understanding how criminal empires worked. As the sun began to set, James watched Bishop's forces gathering in the shadows. The quiet gas station was about to become ground zero in a war 3 decades in the making, and this time, the last war hero wasn't fighting alone. Darkness crept across Sunset Valley as James Connor made final preparations. He'd sent Lisa home and positioned Pete near the backup generator controls. Kate refused to leave, checking security feeds from her office. 3 teams, James said, marking positions on a station map. Ghosts veterans at the north end, Steel Scorpions to the south, Bishop's personal security in those black SUVs across the street. They're really going to attack a gas station? Kate asked, watching shadows move on her security screens. Not just attacking. Bishop wants to send a message. Show everyone what happens to people who stand up to him. The phone rang again. This time it was Thompson. Connor, we've got movement. Bishop's called in every operator he has. At least 30 men. Good, James replied. More witnesses to his downfall. You sure about this? We could move in now, protect the station. No. Bishop needs to show his hand, prove the connection between his current operation and Desert Storm. And you're sure he will? He has to. The files I mentioned, they don't exist. Kate's eyes widened at this revelation. It's a bluff? Thompson asked. Bishop doesn't know that. His guilt will make him act to silence a threat that isn't real. And that's when we'll have him. The first sign of the attack came at 9:47 p.m. The streetlights went dark, followed by power to surrounding buildings. But when they tried to cut the station's power, Pete was ready. The backup generators kicked in immediately. They'll try to jam communications next, James said calmly. Standard tactical approach. Sure enough, cell phones lost signal moments later, but the landline, running through an old copper network, stayed active. Ghost's voice crackled over a loudspeaker. Connor, last chance to walk away. Never were good at negotiations, were you, Sam? James called back. The sound of motorcycles filled the air as the Steel Scorpions moved into position. Tyler's voice carried across the parking lot. Nowhere to... Run, old man. James smiled slightly. Kate, remember what I told you about the security feeds? She nodded, pressing a sequence on her computer. The footage began uploading to multiple secure servers. They're moving in, Pete warned from his position. Let them come, James said. Thompson's teams are in position. We just need Bishop to show himself. The attack began with a flash bang through the front window, but James had been ready, and the device landed in a bucket of water, fizzling harmlessly. Amateur move, he muttered. Ghost is getting sloppy. The steel scorpions charged first, breaking windows and trying to force their way in. But James had prepared for this too. The fire suppression system activated, spraying them with foam and creating chaos. "You're not the only one who remembers Desert Storm tactics," James called out. "Remember the hangars in Kuwait?" Ghost's voice carried a hint of uncertainty now. "Bishop said you were alone." "Bishop's wrong, just like he was wrong in 91. A new voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" Marcus Bishop emerged from one of the SUVs, his expensive suit incongruous in the war zone his men had created. "There he is," James said quietly into a hidden microphone. "The man himself." "You want to talk?" "About 91? Bishop shouted. "Let's talk! Those files you claim to have, the evidence, it all burns tonight." "Along with your whole operation?" James asked. "Those weapons you're moving through here, the drugs, the money laundering? Quite an empire you've built on the back of betrayal." "Betrayal," Bishop laughed. "I gave these men purpose. While the government abandoned them, I gave them a mission. You turned them into criminals, used their skills for your private war." "War?" Bishop's voice rose. "You want to talk about war? What about Sandstorm, the missing weapons, the supplies that disappeared? You think your precious files tell the whole story?" James smiled in the darkness. Kate understood now. He had baited Bishop perfectly, making him incriminate himself in front of dozens of witnesses. "Actually," James said calmly, "I think you just did." Suddenly floodlights blazed from every direction. FBI teams emerged from hiding, weapons drawn. Agent Ramirez's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Marcus Bishop, you are surrounded. We have your confession on multiple recordings." The look of realization on Bishop's face was almost worth the broken windows. "You never had any files," he said, understanding finally dawning. "Didn't need them," James replied. "Just needed you to admit what you've been doing, past and present." As FBI agents moved in, Ghost tried to rally his men for a fight. But the sight of military police vehicles rolling in changed their minds. One by one, Bishop's empire began to crumble. The night wasn't over. There would be resistance, arrests, and revelations that would shake the community. But watching Bishop being led away in handcuffs, James Connor allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the best way to win a war was to let your enemy defeat himself. The aftermath of the raid transformed the quiet gas station into a hub of law enforcement activity. FBI agents processed arrested gang members, while military police secured evidence. James stood with Kate, watching Bishop being interrogated in the back of an FBI vehicle. "All this time," Kate said, "you were planning this." "Not exactly. But I recognized the opportunity when those steel scorpions first showed up. Some patterns never change." Agent Ramirez approached, holstering her weapon. "Mr. Connor, we've been building a case against Bishop for months, but we could never connect him to the Desert Storm incidents. Because you were looking for evidence that didn't exist," James replied. "The real proof was in his guilt, his paranoia about those old files. And now we have his confession, plus evidence of his current operation." Ramirez smiled. "The weapons, cash we found in his warehouse, enough to arm a small army." Ghost was being led past in handcuffs. He stopped, looking at James with a mix of respect and resignation. "You played us, all of us." "No, Ghost. Bishop played you. I just showed everyone what he really was." Tyler and the Steel Scorpions sat in a line, being processed by federal agents. Most of them looked young, lost, veterans who'd been manipulated into joining Bishop's organization. "What happens to them?" Kate asked, nodding toward the younger gang members. "They'll get a chance to make it right," Ramirez answered. "Many of them were coerced or manipulated. We're working with Veteran Services to offer alternatives." Thompson joined them, his CIA credentials drawing cautious looks from the FBI agents. Connor, we found something interesting in Bishop's office. Files on other operations, other cities. This wasn't just local. Of course not, James said. Bishop was building a network, using veteran bike gangs as cover for weapons and drug distribution. Probably has similar setups across the country, which means this is just the beginning, Ramirez added. We'll need your help unraveling the rest of his network. Missing weapons from military bases, Thompson mused. Drug routes through seemingly innocent businesses. Bishop had a whole shadow infrastructure in place. A commotion drew their attention. Officer Martinez was being led out in handcuffs, his police uniform a stark reminder of how deep the corruption ran. How many others? Kate asked. How many more are involved? That's what we're going to find out, Ramirez replied. Mr. Connor, would you be willing to consult on the larger investigation? James watched as more evidence was brought out of Bishop's vehicles, laptops, documents, phones. On one condition, those young veterans Bishop recruited, they get help, not just jail time. Already arranged, Thompson assured him. The military's involved now. They take care of their own, the right way. Pete emerged from the station, carrying fresh coffee for the law enforcement teams. Place is a mess, but structurally sound. We can probably reopen in a few days. Sooner than that, Ramirez said. We'll have teams help with repairs. This station's going to be under protection for a while. Bishop might be down, but his network is still out there. Lisa arrived, having heard about the raid on the news. She stared at the scene in disbelief. All this because some bikers tried to cause trouble. No, James corrected her. All this because people stood together against corruption. Bishop's empire was built on intimidation and fear. Once someone stood up to him, it was bound to crumble. A military vehicle pulled up, and a senior officer stepped out. James recognized the insignia, Army Criminal Investigation Division. They'll want to know about the missing weapons, he told Thompson. Bishop's operation explains a lot of unsolved cases and raises new questions, Thompson added. How many other bishops are out there using veteran gangs as cover? Kate watched as more evidence was loaded into FBI vans. Will it ever really be over? This part is, James assured her. Bishop's finished. His organization will be dismantled, but there's more work to do. And you'll help? James touched his purple heart pin, thinking of all the veterans Bishop had exploited. Someone has to. These young veterans deserved better than becoming pawns in Bishop's private war. The sun was rising over Sunset Valley gas station, marking the end of the longest night in its history. But as James watched federal agents documenting evidence and processing prisoners, he knew this was really just the beginning. Bishop's network would lead them to other operations, other cities where veterans were being exploited. The quiet gas station had become the first domino in what would become a nationwide investigation. And James Connor, the last war hero, wasn't done fighting yet. 3 days after the raid, Sunset Valley gas station reopened. The broken windows had been replaced, the bullet holes patched, but subtle changes remained. FBI surveillance vehicles maintained a discreet presence, and military police regularly passed by on patrol. James sat at the counter, watching Kate direct a team of contractors, installing upgraded security systems. The station had become something of a symbol now, the place where Bishop's empire began to fall. Latest report from Thompson, Ramirez said, sliding onto the stool next to James. We've identified similar operations in 3 other states. Veteran, motorcycle gangs, strategic gas stations, corrupt law enforcement. Bishop's template, James nodded. He was building franchise operations, each cell independent but connected. We've arrested 12 more dirty cops, Ramirez continued. Martinez is talking, trying to make a deal. The corruption went deeper than anyone suspected. A group of Steel Scorpion's bikes sat impounded behind the station, their chrome dulled by forensics powder. Tyler and most of his crew were in federal custody. but some of the younger members had been released to veteran support programs. One of the young riders stopped by earlier, Kate mentioned, joining them. Tommy, I think his name was, wanted to apologize. They're not bad kids, James said. Just lost. Bishop knew how to exploit that. The bell chimed as Pete rushed in, holding a newspaper. You need to see this. Bishop's talking to prosecutors. The headline read, Crime Boss Reveals Nationwide Network of Veteran Exploitation. Smart move, James commented. He's trying to bargain his way to a lighter sentence by exposing his partners. That's not all, Ramirez added. We found evidence of weapons shipments to conflict zones overseas. Bishop wasn't just running a criminal empire, he was operating a private arms trade. Ghost's interrogation had yielded similar revelations. The former Delta Force operator had provided details about training camps where veterans were recruited and radicalized. They targeted the vulnerable ones, James explained. Veterans struggling with civilian life, feeling abandoned by the system. Bishop offered them purpose, brotherhood, and steady pay. Like a terrorist cell, Ramirez noted. Exactly like that. He used military structure because that's what they understood. Turned their training against them. Lisa approached with fresh coffee. She'd insisted on returning to work, refusing to let fear change her routine. More reporters outside, she reported. They want interviews about the raid. Let them wait, Kate said firmly. We're not here for publicity. Thompson's car pulled up outside, and the CIA agent hurried in. Connor, we've got movement. Bishop's associates in other states are starting to panic. They're trying to destroy evidence. Too late for that, James smiled. Once Bishop started talking, the whole house of cards was bound to fall. We've got teams moving in on locations in Texas, Florida, and Nevada, Ramirez added. Synchronized raids, just like here. And the veterans, James asked. The ones Bishop recruited? Most are cooperating, Thompson assured him. They're being offered deals in exchange for information, rehabilitation instead of prison. The station's new security cameras hummed quietly, their lenses tracking movement outside. Kate had installed a state-of-the-art system, determined to prevent any future threats. Bishop's preliminary hearing is tomorrow, Ramirez said. They're charging him with everything from RICO violations to international arms trafficking. He'll try to cut a deal, James predicted. Offer up his whole network in exchange for leniency. Let him, Thompson replied. Every name he gives us leads to another operation we can shut down. A military convoy rumbled past the station, heading toward Bishop's warehouse. They were still cataloging the weapons cache found there. You know, Kate said thoughtfully, when those bikers first showed up, I thought they were just local trouble. Never imagined it would lead to all this. That's how these operations work, James explained. They hide in plain sight, using ordinary businesses as cover. But pull one thread, and the whole thing unravels, Ramirez finished. Pete returned from checking the pumps. Those military police said they found more weapons. Hidden compartments in some of those Steel Scorpion's bikes. Bishop thought of everything. Thompson mused. Using bikers as mobile transport, gas stations as distribution hubs. It was brilliant in a twisted way. But he made one mistake, James said quietly. He forgot that not all veterans can be bought. Some of us still remember what we fought for. The Purple Heart pin on his collar caught the morning light, a reminder of sacrifices made and principles upheld. Outside, another news van pulled up, but inside the station life continued as normal. They had won this battle, but James knew the war wasn't over. Bishop's network was just one head of a larger hydra. But for now, watching Kate's station return to life, seeing Lisa serve coffee without fear, that was enough. Sometimes victory wasn't about big battles. Sometimes it was about small stands at quiet gas stations, where ordinary people refused to be intimidated. And sometimes the last war hero was exactly who was needed to remind everyone what they were fighting for. Bishop's preliminary hearing drew national attention. The courthouse was packed with media, federal agents, and curious onlookers as James Conner took the witness stand. He wore his Purple Heart pin prominently, his presence commanding respect even in the formal setting. "Mr. Conner," the federal prosecutor began, "please explain how you first became aware of Mr. Bishop's criminal enterprise." "It started with intimidation at my local gas station," James testified, his voice steady. "But the tactics they used were military grade, too professional for ordinary gang activity." Kate sat in the gallery, watching Bishop's face as James detailed the events. The former colonel maintained his military bearing, but his eyes betrayed his growing unease. "And you recognized these tactics?" the prosecutor asked. "From Desert Storm," James confirmed. "Bishop used the same methods then, exploiting military resources for private gain. Only now he'd expanded, using veterans instead of supplies." Bishop's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. The connection between past and present was too relevant to ignore. "Tell us about the night of the raid," the prosecutor continued. James described the coordinated attack on the station, how Bishop's forces had employed military strategies. They cut power, tried to jam communications, standard tactical approach for a covert operation. "And Mr. Bishop was present? He revealed himself when he thought he had the upper hand, admitted to everything, the weapons trafficking, the veteran exploitation, even his activities during Desert Storm." Bishop shifted in his seat, realizing how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. During the lunch recess, Agent Ramirez updated James on the broader investigation. Teams in Texas just raided 3 more locations. Same setup. Veteran gangs, strategic gas stations, corrupt local officials. "Bishop's template," James nodded. "How many veterans involved?" "Hundreds, across multiple states. Most were recruited. Right after discharge, Bishop's people targeted VA hospitals, support groups, anywhere they could find struggling veterans. Thompson joined them, carrying classified files. We've linked Bishop's operation to arms shipments in 6 countries. He wasn't just arming street gangs. He was supplying militant groups overseas. "Using veterans to arm terrorists," James said, quietly. The ultimate betrayal. Back in the courtroom, Bishop's lawyer tried to paint his client as a patriot. "Mr. Bishop provided employment and purpose to forgotten veterans. How is that criminal?" "By turning them into criminals," James countered. "By using their training and trauma for his private war. That's not helping veterans, it's exploiting them." Ghost testified next, his prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to his military bearing. He detailed Bishop's recruitment methods, how they identified and groomed vulnerable veterans. "We offered them what the system didn't," Ghost admitted. "Structure, brotherhood, decent pay. But it came with a price, their integrity, their honor." Tyler's testimony followed, the young Steel Scorpions leader looking lost without his gang. "Colors. Bishop's people found me at the VA hospital, said they had a program for vets, helping them transition to civilian life. Never mentioned it was criminal until we were in too deep." During another recess, Kate observed the proceedings' impact on James. "This is personal for you, isn't it?" "Every veteran Bishop corrupted is a reminder of what we fought for," James replied, "and what he betrayed." Pete arrived with news from the station. More young vets showing up. Words spreading about the support programs Ramirez set up. They want out of Bishop's organization. "Good," James said. "That's what this is, really about, giving them a chance to reclaim their honor." The prosecution presented evidence of Bishop's weapons operation, crates of military hardware found in his warehouses, financial records showing millions in illegal arms sales, surveillance photos of transactions with known terrorist groups. Bishop didn't just build a criminal empire, the prosecutor argued. He created a shadow military using America's veterans as his private army. Lisa had come to watch the proceedings, sitting with Kate during the afternoon session. "I can't believe all this started at our station," she whispered. "Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places," Kate replied. As the day wound down, Bishop finally broke his military stance. He requested to address the court, ignoring his lawyer's objections. "Everything I did," he declared, "was for the veterans. The system abandoned them. I gave them purpose." "You gave them chains," James interrupted, drawing a warning from the judge. "You turned their loyalty into slavery." The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Bishop's outburst had revealed his true nature, not a patriot, but a manipulator who preyed on vulnerable veterans. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed for comments. James declined interviews, but Ramirez made a brief statement. "Today marks the beginning, not the end," she announced. "Bishop's network extends across the country. We won't stop until every operation is shut down and every exploited veteran is offered a chance at redemption." Back at the gas station that evening, James sat with Kate, Pete, and Lisa, watching news coverage of the hearing. "Bishop's looking at life," Thompson reported, joining them. "His lawyers are trying to deal, but the evidence is overwhelming." "What about the other operations?" Kate asked. "Falling like dominoes," Ramirez added, arriving with fresh intel. "Bishop's associates are scrambling to save themselves. Some are turning evidence, others trying to flee." "And the veterans?" James asked, his primary concern unchanged. "Rehabilitation programs are in place," Thompson assured him. "The military's involved now, making sure they get real help, real opportunities." The station's new security cameras hummed quietly, scanning empty streets. The steel scorpions were gone, their territory now patrolled by FBI and military police. "One question," Lisa said, voicing what everyone had wondered. "How did you know? That first day, when they showed up, how did you know it would lead to all this?" James touched his purple heart pin, considering. "In Vietnam, I learned to recognize patterns, the way Bishop operated, using veterans, setting up distribution networks. It was too organized for ordinary gang activity. He was building something bigger, something worse. A private army," Pete said, "using men who'd lost their way." James nodded. "Bishop forgot one thing, though. True soldiers never forget their oath, their honor. Once they saw a way out, they took it," Kate finished. The night settled over Sunset Valley gas station, but its role in unraveling Bishop's empire had only begun. More veterans would come seeking help. More operations would be exposed. More battles would be fought. But for now, watching the news coverage with his unlikely band of allies, James Connor, the last war hero, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Sometimes the greatest victories started with a simple stand at a quiet gas station where ordinary people refused to be intimidated. The war wasn't over, but tonight they'd won an important battle. And tomorrow, they'd continue fighting for every veteran Bishop had betrayed. The media frenzy around Bishop's trial brought unexpected attention to Sunset Valley gas station. Reporters camped outside, hoping to catch James or Kate for interviews. But there were other visitors too, veterans who'd heard about the support programs, seeking a way out of similar organizations. "Third one this morning," Kate said, watching a young veteran nervously approach the station. "They all come in the same way." James nodded, recognizing the military bearing beneath the biker leather. "They're testing the waters, making sure it's safe." The young man entered, his gang patches partially covered. His eyes scanned the station, combat training die hard, before settling on James's purple heart pin. "Looking for Connor," he said quietly. "Name's Mike. Was with the raiders in Nevada." "Bishop's operation there?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. Mike nodded. "Similar setup. Gas stations, corrupt cops, weapons moving through truck. Stops. Heard you were helping guys get out." "Agent Ramirez handles that part," James replied, "but you came to the right place." As if on cue, Ramirez entered. She'd set up a temporary office nearby, coordinating with veteran services. "Another one?" she asked, noting Mike's patches. Raiders, James confirmed. Nevada branch. We've been watching them, Ramirez said. Your intel could be valuable. Mike shifted uncomfortably. Look, I ain't looking to be no snitch. Just want out. Got a kid on the way, need to make things right. Nobody's asking you to snitch, James assured him. But if you want help, you need to be honest about what you know. Pete brought coffee. His earlier nervousness around bikers replaced with understanding. On the house, he said. Take your time. Mike's story echoed others they'd heard. Former Marine struggled after discharge, recruited at a VA hospital. The raiders promised brotherhood, purpose, good money. By the time he realized what he was involved in, it felt too late to leave. They got their hooks in deep, Mike explained. Know where your family lives, where your kids go to school. Make it clear there's no walking away. Until now, Ramirez noted, Bishop's arrest changed everything. His whole network's vulnerable. Thompson arrived with fresh intelligence. Raiders are falling apart. Leadership scattered, trying to destroy evidence. Perfect time to move. How many others want out? James asked Mike. Most of the younger guys. We signed up to be soldiers, not criminals. But the senior members, the true believers, they're getting desperate. Desperate how? Kate asked, concern evident in her voice. Talking about one last big move, something to prove they're still strong. James and Thompson exchanged looks. They're planning a show of force, Thompson said. Try to prove Bishop's arrest hasn't weakened them. Multiple chapters coordinating, Mike added. Been stockpiling weapons, watching federal movements. They're gonna hit hard, make an example. Of what? Ramirez demanded. Mike looked at the gas station. Of anyone who helps take them down. The implications were clear. Sunset Valley had become a symbol, both of resistance and vulnerability. We need to move first, Thompson said. Hit their leadership before they can coordinate. No, James countered. We let them come. But this time, we're ready. That's crazy, Pete protested. After everything that's happened, it's perfect, Ramirez interrupted, understanding James's strategy. They'll commit all their resources, expose their entire network, and walk right into a trap, James finished. Mike watched the exchange, recognition dawning. That's what you did with Bishop, made him think he had the upper hand. Sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them choose the battlefield, James explained. But make sure it's rigged in your favor. Over the next hours, they developed the plan. Mike provided details about raider operations, their tactics, their weaknesses. Thompson coordinated with federal teams across 3 states. Ramirez arranged for additional surveillance and support. They'll come at night, Mike predicted. Multiple teams, coordinated assault. They've got police scanners, radio jammers, professional gear. Just like Bishop's attack, Kate remembered. Because it's the same playbook, James said. Military tactics, adapted for criminal operations, but that makes them predictable. Lisa, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. What about the station, all our regular customers? We close early, Kate decided. Make it look like we're scared, reducing hours because of threats. Perfect, Thompson nodded. Let them think they're winning the psychological war. James studied the station blueprints, marking key positions. We'll need to coordinate with local law enforcement, the honest ones. Stage federal teams here, here, and here. Make sure we control all approaches. What about me? Mike asked. You've done your part, Ramirez assured him. We'll get you into protective custody, start the paperwork for the support program. As evening approached, they began implementing the plan. Kate posted notices about reduced hours. Pete secured equipment and valuables. Federal teams established hidden positions around the property. James watched the sunset, remembering other battles, other ambushes. They think they're planning an attack, he mused. Really, they're walking into their own surrender ceremony. You sound pretty confident, Kate said, because I understand men like this. They're so focused on appearing strong, they forget to check for weakness. Bishop made the same mistake. The station grew quiet as darkness fell, but in the shadows, dozens of federal agents waited. Surveillance teams monitored communications, tracking radar movements across 3 states. Everything was prepared. One question Kate asked as they did final checks. What if they don't come? James touched his purple heart pin, a habit that had become familiar to them all. They'll come. Men like this can't help themselves. Their pride won't let them walk away from a challenge. And when they do, Lisa asked, then we finish what started here, not just Bishop's empire, but every organization that preys on veterans. Sometimes it takes a small stand to start a bigger change. The night settled over Sunset Valley gas station, thick with anticipation. In the distance, they could hear motorcycles, not approaching, but gathering. The raiders were coming, just as predicted, but this time the last war hero wasn't just defending a gas station. He was finishing a mission 30 years in the making, giving lost veterans a chance to reclaim their honor. And somewhere in the darkness, redemption waited. Midnight approached Sunset Valley gas station like a gathering storm. James Connor stood by the window, watching surveillance feeds as raiders gathered at multiple staging points. Their coordination was impressive, military precision applied to criminal intent. 3 groups, Thompson reported, monitoring radio traffic. 20 bikes each, plus support vehicles. They're running dark, using night vision. Just like we expected, James nodded. Professional gear, military tactics. They're treating this like a combat operation. Ramirez checked positions with her. Teams. Federal agents were hidden throughout the area, supported by tactical units and military police. But the raiders didn't know that. All they saw was a darkened gas station, apparently vulnerable. Mike's intel was solid, Ramirez confirmed. They're following Bishop's playbook exactly. Power cuts first, then communications jamming. How long? Kate asked, double-checking the backup generators. 10 minutes, James estimated. They'll wait for their recon team to confirm the station's empty, except for basic security. Pete monitored their new security system, watching blips appear on the tactical display. They're surrounding us. 4 layers deep. Standard infiltration pattern, James explained. Outer containment, strike teams, support units, command element. Bishop taught them well. Lisa, who had insisted on staying despite everyone's objections, watched the gathering forces with growing concern. There's so many of them. Numbers don't matter, James assured her. They're fighting the last war, using tactics we've already countered. The first phase began exactly as predicted. Streetlights went dark, followed by power to surrounding buildings. But the station's new generators kicked in seamlessly, maintaining critical systems. Comms are going dark, Thompson warned. They're starting their electronic warfare. Let them think it's working, James instructed. Everyone switched to backup. Frequencies. Raiders appeared on the perimeter, black-clad figures moving with military precision. Their advance was textbook. Coordinated teams securing approaches, establishing fields of fire. They're good, Ramirez admitted, watching through night vision optics. They're predictable, James corrected. See how they're focusing on standard entry points? Forgetting about the underground fuel tank access we converted, Kate watched the raiders deploy, remembering how Bishop's forces had made the same mistake. They think they're in control. Pride, James nodded, makes them forget. The first rule of combat: never assume you know all your enemy's capabilities. The raiders' command vehicle arrived, a modified tactical truck that would have looked at home in a war zone. Their leader, Colonel Jackson, had been Bishop's rival before the arrest. Now he was trying to assert control over the scattered organization. Jackson's, here personally, Thompson noted. That's new. Because this isn't just about us, James explained. It's about power. He wants Bishop's position, needs to prove he can handle resistance. The raiders' attack began with precision. Flashbangs hit windows, smoke grenades deployed around entrances, but the gas station's new defenses neutralized each threat automatically. "They don't realize they're shooting blanks," Ramirez smiled. "Every attack hitting exactly where we want." James watched Jackson coordinate his forces, remembering similar operations from his military days. He's following standard assault protocols, 3 minutes until they breach. "Federal teams are in position," Thompson confirmed, "waiting for your signal." The raiders' main force approached, their boots silent on the pavement. Night vision goggles gave them confidence in the darkness, but they couldn't see the infrared. Strobes that would blind their equipment on command. "Now?" Kate asked, finger hovering over the defense system controls. "Wait," James cautioned. "Let them commit fully. Jackson needs to be inside our perimeter." The first raiders reached the station doors, placing breaching charges. Others established sniper positions, completely unaware they were being watched by federal marksmen. 2 minutes, Ramirez updated. "All teams report ready." James touched his Purple Heart pin, a quiet gesture of respect for what was about to happen. These men weren't evil. They were lost soldiers who'd forgotten their true purpose. "Remember," he told the federal teams, "these are veterans. They deserve a chance to surrender with honor." Jackson's voice crackled over their intercepted communications. "All units, execute." The raiders moved as one, breaching charges detonating, teams rushing forward, but nothing worked as planned. Their night vision went blind, smoke grenades were vented harmlessly, and every entrance proved to be a prepared kill zone. "Now," James commanded. Floodlights blazed from hidden positions, federal teams emerged from concealment, and the raiders found themselves surrounded by overwhelming force. "Colonel Jackson!" Ramirez's voice boomed through superior speakers. "Your forces are surrounded. All approaches are covered. Surrender now." The raiders froze, their military training warring with criminal intent. Some raised weapons, but Jackson's voice stopped them. "Stand down," he ordered, recognizing the futility of resistance. James stepped out, his Purple Heart catching the artificial light. "Hello, Colonel. Been expecting you." Jackson emerged from his command vehicle, a mix of anger and respect on his face. "Connor, should have known. This whole thing stinks of your Vietnam-era tactics." "Difference is, I never forgot what the uniform meant," James replied. "You did." As federal agents moved in, securing weapons and suspects, James approached Jackson. "Your men get the same deal as Bishop's. They help us shut down these operations. They get real support, real chances to rebuild. And if we don't, then you face the consequences alone. Your choice, Colonel. Keep destroying lives or help us save them." Over the next hour, raiders were processed, weapons secured, evidence collected. Many of the younger members immediately accepted the offer of support. Ready to escape the criminal life, Kate watched from the station door as former enemies became cooperating witnesses. "Will this really end it?" she asked James. "This chapter, yes. But there are other organizations, other lost veterans who need help finding their way back. And you'll keep fighting?" James smiled slightly. "Someone has to. Every veteran deserves a chance to remember their honor." As dawn approached, Sunset Valley gas station had become more than just a battlefield. It was becoming a symbol of redemption, a place where lost soldiers could find their way home. The last war hero's mission wasn't over, but tonight dozens of veterans had taken their first steps back toward the light, and somewhere a small purple heartpin reflected the rising sun, a reminder that some battles are fought not with weapons, but with wisdom and compassion. The morning after the raiders' surrender brought new challenges. Federal agents processed evidence while military police coordinated with veteran services. Sunset Valley gas station had become command central for an operation that now spanned 5 states. "Final count," Ramirez reported, reviewing data on her laptop. 47 raiders in custody, including Colonel Jackson. 32 have already agreed to cooperate. "And the weapons?" Thompson asked. "Enough to outfit a small army. Military-grade hardware, some of it straight from active bases. This goes deeper than Bishop or Jackson." James studied the evidence photos spread across Kate's office desk. "These serial numbers, they're from recent shipments. Someone's still actively diverting military supplies." "Could be why Jackson moved so quickly," Kate suggested, bringing fresh coffee. "He wasn't just trying to prove strength. He was protecting his supply chain." Pete entered with more news. 3 more veterans just showed up, former raiders from other chapters, wanting to turn themselves in. The station's parking lot had become a staging area for law enforcement. Impounded motorcycles lined one side, while federal vehicles occupied the other. Lisa worked the counter, serving coffee to a mix of agents and reformed gang members. "Found something interesting in Jackson's files," Thompson said, laying out documents. "Communications with someone. High-ranking. Military Procurement Office." James examined the papers. "General Howard Phillips. I know that name." "You should," Ramirez confirmed. "He's Deputy Director of Military Logistics, controls equipment distribution for 3 branches." "The perfect position to divert supplies," James mused. "Bishop and Jackson were just middlemen. Phillips is the real source." A young raider, barely out of his teens, approached James. "Sir, some of us were talking about what you said, about honor." "Go on," James encouraged. "We know things. About the supply chain, about Phillips. Most of us joined thinking we were helping other vets, never knew we were arming terrorists." "Tell Agent Ramirez everything," James advised. "Help us stop this completely." As the young man spoke with Ramirez, more pieces fell into place. Phillips had been recruiting veterans through a network of corrupt VA officials. The motorcycle gangs were just one part of a larger operation. He used Bishop and Jackson to distribute weapons, Thompson realized. But the real money came from international sales. "Perfect cover," James nodded. "Veterans helping veterans. Nobody looks too closely at motorcycle clubs doing charity runs." Kate watched another group of former raiders talking with military police. "How many more organizations are out there?" "Too many," James replied. "Phillips built a nationwide network, used military precision to create criminal enterprises." "But why?" Lisa asked, joining them during her break. "He was already a general." "Greed," Thompson answered. "We found offshore accounts, millions from arms sales." "Power," James corrected. "Phillips is a true believer, thinks he's building some kind of private army, using veterans as his personal force." Ramirez returned with updates. "Jackson's talking, says Phillips is planning something big, some kind of demonstration of force." "When?" James demanded. "Soon. He's realizing his network is compromised, wants to show strength before everything collapses." The station's security system beeped, showing multiple vehicles approaching. But these weren't threats. They were more veterans coming to turn themselves in. "They're choosing sides," James observed. "Finally seeing the truth about Phillips's operation." "We need to move fast," Thompson urged, "before Phillips can destroy evidence." "No," James said firmly. "We need to be smart. Phillips expects a direct approach, military tactics against military targets." "What's the alternative?" James smiled slightly. "We let him think he's winning, just like with Bishop and Jackson. Pride makes men careless." Kate understood. "Use his own methods against him." "Exactly. Phillips built his empire using military precision. That makes him predictable." Throughout the day, more veterans arrived. Some were raiders, others from different organizations. All had the same story. Recruited with promises of purpose, trapped by manipulation. "Set up a processing center," James advised Ramirez. "Every veteran who turns himself in is a potential witness against Phillips." "Already done," she confirmed. "Military police are coordinating with VA services. Real help this time." Thompson received an urgent call. Phillips is moving, started transferring files, clearing accounts. Perfect, James said. He's following standard protocol, emergency evacuation procedures. How is that perfect? Pete asked. Because now we know exactly what he'll do next. Military doctrine is predictable, especially to someone who spent years studying it. The station had become more than a battlefield. It was becoming a symbol of redemption, where veterans could reclaim their honor. Each arrival weakened Phillips's organization further. We're not just fighting a criminal empire, James told Kate. We're fighting for the soul of every veteran Phillips corrupted. And Phillips himself, she asked. He'll come. Men like him can't resist a direct challenge. When he realizes how many of his people are turning, he'll have to act. As evening approached, James gathered their key allies. The next phase would require perfect coordination, using Phillips's own tactics against him. He thinks he's fighting a conventional war, James explained. But his real weakness is simpler. He forgot what the uniform truly means. The purple heart pin on his collar caught the fading light, a reminder of sacrifices made and honor maintained. Around them, veterans continued to arrive, choosing redemption over corruption. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal empire anymore. It was about saving lost soldiers, giving them a chance to remember their true purpose. And somewhere, a general who had betrayed everything he once stood for was about to learn that some battles can't be won with weapons and tactics. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon is the truth about who you really are. General Howard Phillips sat in his Pentagon office, watching his empire crumble through secure video feeds. Bases across the country reported veterans turning themselves in, exposing weapons caches, revealing distribution networks. 40% of our network compromised, his aide reported. Bishop and Jackson's organizations are completely dismantled, other chapters falling hourly. Phillips studied the footage from Sunset Valley gas station, where James Connor stood talking with former raiders. "One old man," he muttered. "One Vietnam-era spook brings down decades of work. Sir, we need to initiate final protocols. Evidence destruction, account transfers." "No," Phillips interrupted. "Connor's expecting that. He knows military procedure too well." "Then what's our move, sir?" Phillips smiled coldly. "We go where he won't expect. Hit him where he can't defend." At the gas station, James received urgent intel from Thompson. "Phillips is moving, but not how we predicted. No evidence destruction, no account transfers." "Because he knows we're watching for that," James nodded. "He's adapting." "Multiple vehicles leaving military bases," Ramirez added, checking surveillance feeds. "Unauthorized withdrawals of personnel and equipment." "He's gathering forces," James realized. "Not running, attacking." Kate overheard the exchange. "Here? After what happened to Bishop and Jackson?" "Not here," James corrected. "Phillips thinks like a general. He'll target infrastructure, supply lines." "The veteran support centers," Thompson interrupted, "where we're processing his former soldiers." "Exactly. Hit the weak points. Show everyone what happens to those who betray him." Ramirez's phone buzzed with alerts. 3 centers already reporting suspicious activity, armed men in military vehicles. "He's trying to shut down the defection pipeline," James said. "Scare veterans back into line." "We need to move forces to protect the centers," Thompson urged. "No," James countered. "That's what he expects. Military thinking. Protect the vulnerable." "And points." "Then what?" James smiled slightly. "We let him think it's working, while we hit what he's really protecting." "Which is?" Kate asked. "His reputation. Phillips built everything on his image as a patriotic general helping veterans. That's his real vulnerable point." Over the next hour, they monitored Phillips's forces gathering. Former Special Forces operators, corrupt military police, mercenaries, all coordinating for simultaneous strikes. 4 primary targets, Ramirez reported. Support centers in major cities, classic shock and awe tactics. "While we're distracted defending them," James noted, Phillips will destroy his real evidence. Pentagon files, financial records, communication, logs. So we let him hit the centers? Pete asked, horrified. No, we've already evacuated them. Every veteran is safe, every piece of evidence secured. Phillips is committing forces to attack empty buildings, Thompson understood, while his own office is vulnerable. Exactly. He's a general fighting the last war, expecting us to react like soldiers. Kate watched the tactical displays showing Phillips's forces moving into position. All this because some bikers caused trouble at a gas station. Sometimes the biggest changes start small, James replied. One act of defiance showing others it's possible to resist. Lisa brought updates from monitoring radio traffic. They're starting their attacks. Military vehicles, armed men, finding empty buildings, James finished, and broadcasting their presence to every law enforcement agency in range. Ramirez's phone lit up. Pentagon security is responding. Phillips's unauthorized mobilization just got flagged by 3 different commands. His own tactics expose him, James explained. Military precision leaves patterns. Patterns create evidence. Thompson received confirmation from his contacts. Joint Chiefs are moving. Phillips' office is being secured. All his files, all his records. Everything he thought. He was protecting by distracting us, James nodded. The next hours brought a cascade of developments. Phillips's forces found themselves surrounded at empty support centers. Pentagon investigators seized computers and documents. The general's carefully constructed facade crumbled under official scrutiny. He's running, Ramirez announced, tracking Phillips's vehicle leaving Washington, heading west on back roads. Let him, James said calmly. Every mile takes him further from his power base. You don't want to stop him? Kate asked. He's already stopped. A general without forces, without resources, without authority. His own actions convicted him. More reports flooded in. Phillips's offshore accounts frozen, his military contacts under investigation. The network he spent decades building collapsed in hours. He's reaching out to his last loyal operators, Thompson reported, trying to organize some kind of resistance. But his messages are going to people already in custody, James noted. Every response leads investigators to new evidence. As night fell, Sunset Valley gas station remained calm. The Veteran Processing Center operated smoothly, helping former gang members transition to legitimate support programs. Phillips thought he could control veterans through fear and manipulation, James told Kate. He forgot what really drives soldiers, honor, duty, the desire to serve something greater than themselves. And now? Now they remember. Every veteran who turns himself in, every operator who chooses to make things right. They're reclaiming what Phillips tried to steal. The Purple Heart pin caught the evening light. A reminder that some victories don't require weapons or tactics. Sometimes the greatest battles are won by simply showing others the way back to their true purpose. Phillips would be caught eventually, his empire completely dismantled. But the real victory was already won, in the eyes of veterans remembering, their honor choosing redemption over corruption. And it all started with a simple stand at a quiet gas station, where one old warrior showed others it was never too late to fight for what was right. 1 month after Phillips' network collapsed, Sunset Valley gas station hosted a different kind of gathering. Veterans from across the country, former raiders, reformed gang members, and others who'd escaped Phillips's influence, gathered to mark their new beginnings. Final numbers, Ramirez reported to James, watching the crowd from behind the counter. 812 veterans in rehabilitation programs, 300 million in seized assets. Weapons recovered from 37 locations across 12 states. And Phillips? Kate asked, serving coffee to a group of former raiders now wearing civilian clothes. Caught trying to cross into Canada, Thompson added. His own military protocols betrayed him. Used predictable escape routes, documented procedures. James watched a young veteran playing with his kids in the parking lot. A month ago, he'd been running guns for Phillips. Now he was rebuilding his life. The weapons connection goes deeper than we thought, Ramirez continued. International arms dealers, terrorist cells, corrupt military contractors. Phillips' network was just the tip of the iceberg, but his collapse exposed everything. James nodded. Like pulling one thread that unravels the whole sweater. Pete, now comfortable among the reformed gang members, directed traffic in the busy lot. The station had become more than a business. It was a symbol of redemption. Bishop's trial starts next week, Thompson reported. Between his testimony and Jackson's evidence, Phillips is looking at multiple life sentences. Lisa emerged from the stockroom, carrying supplies for the gathering. More veterans arriving, some from as far as Texas and Florida. They're not just coming for the ceremony, James explained. They're coming to see proof that change is possible. The ceremony was simple but powerful. Each veteran received official recognition of their participation in the rehabilitation program. Military officials, legitimate ones this time, spoke about honor and redemption. A year ago, one former raider told the crowd, "I thought I was helping veterans by joining Phillips's organization. Today, I'm actually doing it, counseling others who want to escape that life." Ghost, now cooperating fully with authorities, approached James. "You knew, didn't you? From that first day at the station, you saw what Phillips was building." "I recognize the patterns," James replied. "Same ones I tracked in Vietnam, men turning soldiers into criminals, using their training for private wars." Kate watched more vehicles arrive. Not motorcycles this time, but family cars bringing veterans and their loved ones. "Hard to believe it all started with some bikers causing trouble. Sometimes that's all it takes," James said. "One moment where people choose to stand against intimidation." The purple heart pin on his collar caught the sunlight as he addressed the gathering. "What Phillips tried to steal from you wasn't just your skills or your loyalty. He tried to steal your identity as soldiers. Today you reclaim that." Ramirez updated them on ongoing operations. Phillips' arrest had exposed similar networks in other countries. International task forces were using their evidence to dismantle criminal enterprises worldwide. "Your station's become famous," Thompson told Kate. "Symbol of resistance against corruption. Other communities are following your example, standing up to criminal organizations." "We just did what was right," Kate replied. "James showed us how." "No," James corrected her. "You all chose to stand together. I just reminded you it was possible." As evening approached, families gathered for a community meal. Former enemies sat together, sharing stories of redemption. Children played where once there had been standoffs. "What happens next?" Lisa asked, watching the transformed parking lot. "We keep working," James replied. "There are other Phillips out there, other veterans being exploited, but now they know there's a way out." The station's new security cameras watched quietly, their presence now comforting rather than defensive. The scars from previous battles remained, repaired windows, patched bullet holes, but they were marks of triumph, not tragedy. "One last thing," Ramirez said, presenting James with an official document. "Joint Task Force wants you to consult. Help identify other networks, guide rehabilitation programs." "Getting back in the game?" Kate asked him. James touched his purple heart pin, considering. "Never really left it. Some wars don't end. They just change battlefields." The sunset painted. Sunset Valley gas station in golden light. Where once there had been violence and fear, now there was healing and hope. Veterans who had lost their way found a path back to honor, and it all began because a couple of bikers provoked the last war hero at a quiet gas station. They thought they were intimidating an old man. Instead, they started a chain of events that would dismantle criminal empires and save hundreds of lost soldiers. James Connor watched the gathering, remembering that first confrontation. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting battles, but from showing others they can win their own. The Purple Heart caught the last rays of sun, a final reminder that true courage isn't about winning fights. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. And in a quiet gas station in Sunset Valley, that lesson would never be forgotten.